If you like planes and like watching planes land, you've probably recently seen this video. And if you haven't seen that video, you've definitely seen this one. And clearly that is not what a landing is supposed to look like, and something went very wrong. So did these pilots make the exact same mistake because they're flying the exact same type of plane, a Boeing 777? Did they make the same mistake, or did something else happen? Let's see what happens in this video.
Next arrival, 777 American 134 from Los Angeles, CPR 1234. Thank you. Look at the vortex coming off the wings, folks, off the flap tips. Look at that vortex. Might hear that vortex crashing down on me. Listen to it. It's over the top of me now. Oh! 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 Stop it! Oh! 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 Stop! Stop that! Stop that! Oh! Oh my God, mate! Now you tell me those pilots weren't like, oh, flipping heck! Hold on a minute!
Obviously, I'm sitting in a hotel room on a layover, and when I hear that guy making all these noises...
Oh! 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 Stop! Stop that! Stop that! Oh!
I just wonder what the people in the next room are thinking I'm actually doing over here. Now, one of the things that these planespotters are doing that I love is they're getting these really expensive high-end cameras which allow me to watch these full screen on my laptop to see exactly what's going on. Because one of the most important things when you're watching these landings is actually to see what the flight controls are doing. And because they're using, I think, a really high-quality camera, or maybe just the way the lighting works, we can see what's going on while they're trying to land. It looks like as the plane is coming in, the nose is pointing to the left, which indicates the wind is coming from that direction. The pilot is doing a really normal technique that we call crabbing, and this is basically what it looks like from above. The plane is approaching the runway is here, but the nose of the plane is actually pointing at a different angle. Now it looks strange, but it's something we learned very early in flight school as a skill in order to land when the wind's not coming directly down the runway. And while it's something that you learn very early on, it takes a lifetime to perfect because the winds are always changing. The speeds are changing, the direction is changing, it's moving, it's swirling. So you're having to notice and feel those inputs that are coming in from the wind and then correct in order to get the plane lined up on the runway. So it is a skill that you learn very early on, but it takes a lifetime, and it's a skill that you have to keep using and practicing to keep it working and keeping your plane down the middle of the runway. So it's not just like, oh, I've learned the skill and now it works perfect every time, because in a simulator it'd be like that, but in the real world, sometimes you have a gust, then you don't have a gust, it changes direction. So you're always kind of having to adapt with what's going on. Now watch the sequence of events here. First, I want you to look at the rudder. I'm slowing it down so you can see right now that the pilot has some rudder in. But watch here as the rudder comes out and it actually aligns up perfectly with the plane, meaning the pilots aren't putting in any rudder. When we're flying in a crosswind, what we're dealing with is we have one hand that's steering the plane left or right, we have one hand that's handling the power, and then we're using our feet to move that rudder to the left or to the right depending on where the direction of the wind is coming from. We also use it to steer, but in this case we're using it to keep the plane straight or going down the runway. So you got your hand, each hand doing something and your feet doing something. There's a lot going on, and you're having to look outside and then interpret the information that your plane is giving you based off of the wind, based off what the plane is doing. You got to process all of that and then add the necessary inputs. Add more power because you're getting slow, or lean the plane to the left or to the right depending on how you're lined up with the runway. Use the rudders depending on how much the wind is changing. Is it coming as a gust? Is it going away? And so you're using all of those things, and so in the back it might feel like you're getting moved around a lot, and that's because the pilots are changing all these inputs in order to get this plane to line up on the runway. It makes sense, right? So in that crab video earlier, we have the wind coming from the side, and that means the pilots are actually going to be stepping on the rudder, and that will straighten the plane out. But if the pilot lets off the rudder, then the plane should go back into the direction that it was going in before. The reason being is because the wind is actually hitting this side of the plane here, which is forcing the nose to go towards the direction of the wind. Which then really makes sense why aliens are using flying saucers, because then they don't have to deal with the crosswinds and this type of strategy. But something happens that's really strange. You see right here in the beginning of the video, the nose is pointing towards the left, which means that's the direction the wind is coming from, and they're using the rudder to straighten it out on the runway. but then you see the rudder come out and it looks like the nose actually goes towards the right, which means the wind could have shifted, which would then cause the pilots to want to get back over to the runway. And by doing that, they're actually dipping that left wing to try to get the plane to lean back to the left, which is not a great strategy, but it's something that the pilots are reacting to with very little time. Now keep in mind, I'm watching this from an angle, so it's a little bit hard to see exactly what's going on, but the pilots are interpreting this information, and if the wind were to shift just immediately from one side to the other, typically your inclination is when you're coming in on a crosswind landing, you're using one foot and you're using that foot and you're just pushing more or less, and just to kind of balance to keep the plane going down the middle of the runway. So sometimes you need a lot of rudder, sometimes you need a little bit of rudder, but you're kind of modulating that foot in order to keep the plane lined up the way that you want to. But usually it's just coming from one side. Doesn't usually, as you're landing, spin around the other way. But look what happens. Right here, it looks like they're lined up and they're using some rudder to go in and land pretty much straight. And as they take the rudder out, it looks like the nose of the plane is actually now pointing to the right. The left aileron is coming down, meaning the pilots are trying to get to the left, which means they're probably on the right side of the runway. Now, what that could also mean is that the pilots were coming in and they were lined up with the runway, but they weren't lined up correctly. And by pushing that rudder in, they're trying to keep the plane lined up, but if they're not putting enough correction in as far as the wings, meaning you're keeping it level with the middle of the runway, you get to this point where you now take the rudder out and try to push the wing down to get to go left, because that's obviously how you steer, left and right. So you're looking down the runway thinking, I want to go to the left, I need my wing to go to the down so we can start going that direction. The problem is you can't land a big jet by putting the wings down really low to the ground like that, especially on, let's say, a 4-engine aircraft, because with a 4-engine aircraft, those engines that are out towards the ends of the wing are going to slap on the ground. So if you're to the right of the runway, you as a pilot are thinking, I need to go left, and instinctively, a lot of times pilots will want to use the wings to get you there, but that doesn't work out very well. I realize that we're watching at an angle here, but it looks like as they take the rudder out, the actual nose goes to the right, which would mean a wind shift. And means the wind is now pushing it to the right-hand side, which would drive the nose to the right-hand side, but would usually push the plane to the left. Now that's something that happens in the real world where the wind just starts shifting, wind shear. You've heard that term used before. So you can have it where the wind is shifting as you're going through different elevations, different altitudes, or you can just have it where the wind just happens to be swirling at the airport where you're at. Sometimes you'll see those windsocks and they're moving from one direction, and then a few seconds later they're moving the other direction. Some places like Alaska, you'll have one side of the airport where the wind is moving one direction, and on the other side it's moving a totally different direction. So you as a pilot obviously can't see that as you're getting on the runway, so you're just having to react with what your aircraft is doing. So if you're flying and your plane is like this, and then you're like getting ready to land, and so you start to get here, and then all of a sudden your plane starts shifting this way, you have to basically do everything in reverse. Different rudder, different aileron, you have to put all these things in, and you're talking about split second. And it's very uncommon to see that happen in real life on a jet. You might see it once or twice in your career where it shifts in those last 20 feet like that. It's not an easy correction to make. That's what looks like happens if the wind's shifting, or they've somehow lined up to the side and then got the plane to bank to the left, and then because of the angle it looks like it's going right. I can't really tell from this angle. The problem is with the plane not lined up with the runway and it looking like the wind is shifting left and right, the obvious choice here is to go around. What that pilot was doing is known as a side slip technique, which is something that I was always told when I went to jets, don't do that. And it's actually not something that I was doing on the 747 until just recently. I would come in, let the plane be in that crab until about 10 feet off the ground, and then put my correction in. However, the plane, the autopilot, when it lands in an auto landing, it will do a cross correct, a side slip, like what you saw that pilot doing there, which is where you put in opposite rudder to what it is that you're putting in your control input. So you're kind of keeping the plane to go straight, even though the wind is wanting to push you a direction, you're keeping the plane to go straight. But at the end of the day, you have to keep your wings level as you come in. If you start to dip your wing, which is what they teach you in flight school, then you have the risk of having a pod strike, which is what we call when an engine hits the ground. I don't know why they don't call it an engine strike. They call it a pod strike, maybe because it doesn't sound as terrible. Now, I have a manual that was put out by Boeing that our company gives us called the Boeing Flight Crew Training Manual. It's really good, but I can't show you my version because there's things on there that aren't on the internet. This, however, was on the internet. And I want to show you this section right here where it talks about crosswind landings. You'll see right here there's actually a crosswind landing section, and one of the options is side slip wing low. But you'll notice this very last section talks about just how important it is that you keep your wings level upon landing. When I was in the simulator, the last simulator session I did, we were coming in and the instructor said, hey, let's do some crosswind landings. And yeah, okay, cool, let's do it. I think it was like 40 or 50 knots. We started like 20, then 30, 40, I think maybe 50 or 45. I don't know. He was like, let's do the max. Okay, fine, let's do it. It's in the simulator. That's the time to do something difficult. So they gave us max, and what I was doing was my technique, which is stay in the crab, 10 feet off the ground, straighten out, land, and that's fine. However, there is a lot more movement going on when you're doing it that way. If you do what this pilot, I think, was intending to do, which is to have a little bit of crab and a little bit of rudder, you're keeping the plane more straight and you're having less movement. If you've seen those planes where they're sideways, 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 and then 5-10 feet off the ground, they go straight, the problem is that wing that you're bringing forward starts generating a lot of lift because you're moving it across the air faster. Moving it across the air, the wing wants to go up, that wing goes up, this wing goes down. Now you're at risk of this side hitting the ground. And the wind is usually coming from the side that you bring the wing forward, right? Because you're like this, the wind is coming from the left, and you go, okay, let's land. Now you go forward like this, and when you go forward, that left wing goes up, the wind gets under it, which pushes it up even more, and you can slam that right-hand side down. Obviously, in this scenario, from the angle, it looks like they're left. Then he takes the rudder out, and then it goes to the right. So did the wind shift? I don't know. Either way, I think everybody on the flight deck after that was thinking we should have definitely gone around. But you're talking about a split-second decision. Obviously, from the comfort of your home or a hotel, it's easy to look at it and go, yeah, obviously I would have done a go-around. But in the moment, as you're seeing this all play out, it's very unstable in the last 2 seconds. So it's easy right now to say, yeah, we should have done a go-around. And probably if you ask all those pilots that were on the flight deck, yeah, we absolutely should have done a go-around. But you're fighting with this situation, and obviously your strategy right there is to safely land the plane. And that was the decision they went with, is to make it work. It doesn't look like they had an engine strike or a pod strike or a wing strike. So they made it work, but I'm sure there was some uncomfortable people in the back. Let's see what happens in this next video.
Air Canada 840,
Whoa!
departure 128 exit.
Go around.
Air Canada 840.
Nope.
Nope, that's a different situation than what the other pilot was doing in the first video. This pilot is dealing with not that strong of a crosswind, and it's coming constant from one direction, and I'm seeing that from the windsock right here. These windsocks fully inflate at 15 knots. So when you see it completely full, that's 15 knots. Then when it drops off here, you're looking at probably 10 to 12 knots. So the wind is going somewhere between 10 to 12 knots to 15 plus, 20, possibly 30, I don't know. But as I rewind this, you'll see what happens right here. And I can't see the rudder of the plane, but the plane starts rocking its wings 30 or 40 feet off the ground. And that is a terrible start to any landing. As you're coming in to land, you want to be stable, meaning you want to have little bitty corrections as you're coming in. If you go through flight school, your instructors will always say you like little corrections, and it's the same when you get to a big jet, little corrections, little corrections. You don't want to be going far left, far right. That's not stable. Far left, far right, anywhere 50 feet or 100 feet below the ground. Now you got to do a go around. Let's go try this again. So it's a bad habit that you will learn in flight school. Your landings, well, my landings looked a lot like that. I'm always to the left, to the right, to the left, and doing these big corrections. That's terrible. I've never done that in a large jet, and hopefully won't ever, and I don't plan to. But when you're on a small plane, you can do those big corrections a lot of times because the wings are so short that you'd have to go like really far to the left or to the right in order for those wings to hit the ground. On a bigger jet, one, that's not safe, it's not stable. You have the risk of having the engines hit the ground depending on what type of engines that you have on there. Plus, you have a bunch of people in some cases or whatever in the back, and they don't want to be in a code brown situation. You're going to notice here that the right wing goes up. Maybe it's from the wind or possibly the pilot caused it, and then they corrected by putting it down. But in doing so, they ended up slamming the right side of the gear down. And the left wing is still way up in the air and that gear isn't on the ground. So typical logic with physics is this side is going to want to come to the ground as well very fast. And then we can't really see exactly what happens because this truck, which clearly only cares about himself and not the video that I'm trying to shoot, blocks the way. And because the angle of the sun. Now, I'm not trying to make an excuse for these pilots here, but I will say landing with the sun at that angle is not fun. I always fly with a hat. I've used that for landing. Sometimes you see me in some of my vlogs where I fly with a hoodie and I have my hoodie on. There's been cases where I'm flying and the sun is just like that, directly on the horizon. You're landing with it directly in your eyes. And the planes don't have like a sun visor, which you can put down and just block it out. There's FAA approved shades that you can put there that will kind of reduce it. But for me, I can't see. They say if you have blue eyes that your eyes are more sensitive to light. I don't know. I've never had any color eyes, so I don't know what it's like for other people. But with the sun directly in my eyes, it hurts. I can't see. So I wear a hat or I've used my hoodie, and I leave my hoodie covered really low over my eyes like this so I can see the runway, but I'm not getting hit in the eyes. So the FAA won't let you put anything in the window, but it will let you wear a hat. I don't know. They make the rules. I'm just here to fly the plane safely. So the other factor in all of this is that the pilots are fighting with the sun and it's blinding when it's coming at you from that angle. To me, the first plane looks like it's dealing with a wind shift or something else that's going wrong because overall, as the approach is coming in, it looks a lot more stable from the rudder inputs. It looks like they're in a side slip and they're coming in and then the nose points far to the right and then they're doing a bank to the left. Obviously, they should have done a go-around, but it looks like some type of a wind shift happened because even if the wind had gone neutral, the plane's nose shouldn't have gone to the right. Again, we're watching it from an angle, so that's kind of what it looks like. It looks like it shifted all the way around, which is just bad luck. And in that case, boom, you do a go-around, come back around, and the likelihood of that happening 2 times in a row, very unlikely. However, in the second situation, the plane that's coming in, that wind doesn't seem to be too strong. If it's going to 10 knots, it's probably not gusting to 35. It's probably like 10 knots, gusting to 20 knots, something like that. Something like that is a lot easier to handle. 10 knots, even if it's a direct crosswind, easy. Gusting to 20, not really a big deal. And you can just kind of modulate, like I talked about earlier, on the rudder. So, the gust happens, the plane's going to move. Well, then you just add a little bit more rudder and you straighten it out. When you add that more rudder and it straightens out and the gust goes away, the nose will go the other direction. So you have to take the rudder out. So you're kind of just modulating that rudder in order to keep the plane going down the runway while you use one hand for power, the other hand to keep your wings level as you come in because you now have to change the wing, the amount of input that you put in order to keep your wings level on touchdown. You got to keep an eye on your airspeed, keep an eye on the glide path that you're coming down to touch the runway. So there is a lot that's happening all at once, and it takes a lot of practice to be able to do these types of landings really well. And unfortunately, in every case, there will be situations like a wind shift that you maybe haven't seen for 5 or 10 years. So in that second situation with the wing rocking, at that point, if you're rocking your wings that far above the ground, and that means you're probably not lined up or something's not right, at that point, it makes a lot more sense to do a go-around. On the one that was closer, the American plane, when they were closer to the ground, you're so close to the ground, and I think what happens is pilots get into this mentality of like complete the mission, and they try to force that landing. And it is not what's supposed to happen, but I understand it more because you're closer to the ground, a wheel has touched, so now you're trying to get in there and make it work, and the wind is shifted, so you're just feet off the ground, and you're just trying to complete that landing. Obviously, they should have done a go-around as well, but that first one with the wing rock, that didn't need to happen. That means they weren't they didn't have any corrections in there, and they should have been able to land and not have any issues. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.